There's something that's been happening recently on social media that has changed my mind about both young people and the power of social media. I realized that young people have become really good critical thinkers. My theory is that because young people have been exposed to manipulation, misinformation, manipulative framing, and other tools that people use to argue, rhetorical tools that people use to convince people that they're right and others are wrong, because young people have been exposed to these ideas on social media, they've become a lot more savvy in consuming information and consuming news, so that you see one story on mainstream news, which is very pro-Israeli, and same thing with our politicians, Democrats and Republicans are alike, very pro-Israeli. You look at the discourse on the media, and it's also very one-sided. Everything started on October 7th. There's no history, there's no context, there's no other information given, there's no critical thinking around it. But then when I went on social media, and this isn't just TikTok, but even on Instagram, there's a lot of discussion going on. These young people are looking at the history. They're looking at the framing of this whole conflict. They're looking at the imbalance of power between the Palestinians and Israelis. They're really questioning all these ideas that for the longest time, generations before, my age and older, just kind of took for granted. They accepted what was given to them. And, unless you were from the region, unless you knew people from the area, then you might have a more nuanced understanding of the issues and the topic. And that's how I grew up, My father grew up in the Middle East, and so he shared those insights with me, usually through cursing at the television, but there was another perspective that I gained by seeing my father's frustration with the narratives that were being told here, that were being told to us. And it was a narrative that took away the humanity of the Palestinians, that really just portrayed them as the aggressors, as the people who just want to fight and kill everyone in the West and the Jews, and they're inherently prejudiced. And young people now have seen past that. They understand there's a history. They understand that these people are oppressed, and they're just trying to assert themselves and get some sort of justice for themselves and some sort of safety and stability that they just haven't had in 70, 80 years now. But in this is a lesson for all of us that we can't just accept narratives that we're spoon-fed. And when we see, our government, both parties, just feeding us the same line, oversimplified narratives, we need to dig deeper. It's not a bad idea we jump on social media. Look, it's not a pretty place. There's a lot of arguing. There's a lot of contentious feelings. But if you just read a little bit and you gain the different perspectives, and I'm not saying just consume one perspective. I don't. I listen to both sides. I try to understand both sides so that I can make an informed decision. And I encourage everybody else, and it's not just the Palestinian-Israeli conflict that we need to question. We have issues of homelessness in this country. We have issues around politics and increasingly contentious politics and increasingly contentious society. And we look and we're like, oh, if we eliminate social media, that's going to make everything better. That's going to reduce the tensions. But what I'm realizing is maybe social media is the answer. Maybe more nuanced discussions, maybe narratives that aren't very popular need to be considered so that we can become better critical thinkers. I'm not saying swallow the predominant narrative on social media versus the predominant narrative on mainstream media. Rather, think more critically. And the more information we have, the more perspectives we hear from, the better critical thinkers we become. The more arguments we observe, the more kind of manipulations we observe, the more framing, it's like this person frames it this way, this person frames it this way, and comes to a very different conclusion. Well, okay, what's the right framing for this particular, issue? And it opens our mind. It allows us to see an issue from multiple perspectives and make a better decision. And so, again, I was one of those people who really did see social media as the problem, young people as being naive and not really understanding the nuance of issues. But they are seeing something we don't. And they're doing this because they are exposed to different ideas. They are exposed to propaganda and misinformation, and they've become, like I said, very critical thinkers as a result. And I think we all need to expose ourselves to diverse thoughts, to even manipulations, so that we become better at identifying them, seeing them, identifying them, and calling them out. The other thing I've seen coming out of this whole Palestinian conflict on social media, especially around the youth, is this new way of looking at the world around us. For the longest time, as Americans, we have these ideals of human rights, dignity, equality, justice, compassion. We have these ideas in our nation. And, while they haven't been perfect from day one, there's this desire to continually improve ourselves, to apply these ideals to women, to minorities, to other ethnic and racial groups. And we've made progress. We've made a lot of progress. There's still a ways to go, but we've made progress. But we have another face, and that other face is an international one. While domestically we try to perfect these ideas of, like I said, equality and dignity and human rights, internationally, we do not even try to realize these ideals around the world in our foreign policy. For us, might makes right internationally. We see that in order to protect our interests, we have to get what we want. And unfortunately, often that means another society, another group of people suffers for us to get what we want. And what I've seen with young people, these young people, their perspective of human rights and dignity and justice and equality doesn't just apply to Americans, but applies to people around the world. And so they see Palestinians as fellow human beings that deserve dignity and equality and rights and all those things that we take for granted. They deserve them as well. And this is a shift, and it's a very important shift because, like I said, for the longest time, our attitude internationally was might makes right. Even when we did use, we talked about, bringing democracy and freedom to other countries, it was a tool we used to get what we wanted, right? So overseas, we would overthrow democratically elected governments. We would support dictators. We would ignore the pleas of people who were asking for our help, who wanted the freedoms and democracy and rights that we took advantage of, that we took for granted. And there were countries we went in and we gave them those things when they didn't want it. So again, I'm impressed with these young people who have been able to rise above the rhetoric, the fear, even sometimes the outright bigotry and prejudice that we have towards other people around the world, and see them as equals, see them as peers, see them as people who deserve the rights that we have. I believe that serves us in the long run. We've done these things where we've overthrown democratically elected governments, and what do we get? We get the Ayatollahs in Iran, who are like the mortal enemy right now. We support dictators. We give so much in arms and weaponry to Israel, and they use that against innocent Palestinian men, women, children, like we're seeing these days. This was the motivation behind the 9/11 hijackers. They were like, look, you are interfering in our society. Your actions are oppressing us, depriving us of the freedoms and rights that you have and you take advantage of. And you know what? We're going to bring the war to you. that's what they were doing. They were like, the United States have harmed them for so long that they had to do something in their eyes. Now, what they did was horrific, taking innocent lives. That is not acceptable. But, as a result of our actions, we created this response. And then what was our response to that? Well, we invaded 2 countries. We caused countless suffering in these countries, and in our soldiers and their families when they came home. I've heard commentators, media commentators, news commentators, professional journalists that have witnessed our history, that are far more educated than most of us, support this idea of, well, America has to defend its interests internationally. We have to do some bad things in order to protect ourselves. These young people are seeing through that, and they're realizing that, no, actually, being cruel towards other nations, other people, it's not only wrong, but it comes back and harms us in the long run. And so all we can do is, build these walls. We can, make our army stronger to fight off these people, these new enemies that are popping up everywhere for God knows why, right? And we end up in this cycle of violence and fear, and instead of investing in our people, instead of training us for the next generation of jobs, instead of, lifting those people who fall between the cracks and helping them to become productive members of society, we're too busy fighting the rest of the world, investing in army bases and places I didn't even know we had bases. And this fuels hatred for us around the world, and it's empowering other countries. China's on the rise, Russia's on the rise, and these countries are only too happy to take advantage of our callous attitude towards others. Like, my wife just came back from Hong Kong, and she was listening to Chinese news, and they are out there saying, world, we're on your side. We need to bring the Israelis to the peace table, and we stand, with you against the barbarity of the West and their callousness towards us. That touches people. That gets to people. That galvanizes the world against us. And in such an interconnected world, we can't be perceived as this bully, as this cruel nation that looks down at others, that deprives them of their lives, their dignity. So I see in these young people who do see the dignity and the humanity of people around the world, I see our future. I see a further realization of what it means to be American, of human dignity, protecting human dignity, human rights, of establishing justice and equality and fairness, and promoting them, not just at home, but abroad. But it requires a shift. We all need to be more critical of the narratives we're being fed, because really they're coming back and biting us on the ass. These narratives are lies, and they're leading to bad judgments, and they're galvanizing the world against us. And that's fine, whether somebody wants to be a protectionist and say America first, or it doesn't matter. We're a part of the world. We trade with the world. We sell our goods around the world. And do we really want people boycotting American products because of that? It's bad for business. It's bad for our economy. We all need to take a closer look at how these young people are thinking, how they see the world, how they've become more sophisticated consumers of information. I think it serves us well. And dismissing young people, dismissing social media as the problem, it's a big mistake. And so, I've come to realize this, and I hope my realization is, prompting others, helping others to see this mistake in our thinking. Let me know what you think. Thanks for listening. Wish you the best. Bye.